The cafe was softly lit with golden fairy lights, the kind of place where conversations seemed to hang in the air longer than usual, and yet Clara Montgomery, the powerful CEO of one of the city's fastest-growing tech firms, felt oddly out of place. Her tailored beige blazer and sleek heels were a sharp contrast to the relaxed, almost bohemian vibe of the spot. She wasn't supposed to be here, not at all. If it weren't for her best friend convincing her that a blind date might loosen the invisible chains of loneliness she wore, Clara would still be in her penthouse reviewing quarterly reports. She glanced at her phone, scrolling through emails, half distracted, when her daughter Lily tugged gently at her sleeve and whispered that the hot chocolate was the best she'd ever tasted. Clara forced a smile, the kind of smile mothers give when their mind is elsewhere but their heart belongs fully to the child. And then, at the table across from her, a man appeared, simple in his appearance, wearing a rugged olive jacket and faded jeans. He looked cautious, perhaps even nervous, as though he wasn't sure he belonged there either. That was Daniel, though she didn't know his name yet. A janitor by profession, a man of few possessions but with eyes that carried stories Clara couldn't yet read. Daniel sat down, folding his calloused hands in front of him, and glanced briefly at Clara before lowering his gaze. He wasn't used to women like her. Everything about her screamed perfection, her posture, her polished nails, the expensive watch on her wrist, the aura of authority she carried effortlessly. He almost regretted saying yes to this blind date arranged by a mutual acquaintance, knowing the gulf between their worlds was far too wide. He cleared his throat and offered a hesitant, "Hi," which sounded clumsy against the backdrop of cafe music and clinking cups. Clara looked up, finally noticing him, her expression neutral but her eyes measuring. She had met enough people in her boardrooms to know when someone was masking insecurity. But what caught her off guard was the honesty in his demeanor. He wasn't pretending, wasn't posturing like the wealthy men she usually met at charity galas. He was simply there, present, authentic. Lily, her daughter, leaned forward and grinned at Daniel with childlike openness, asking him if he liked marshmallows in his cocoa. He chuckled nervously, nodded, and that single moment of shared laughter between the little girl and the janitor cracked open something in Clara's carefully constructed armor. As the conversation slowly began, Clara found herself juggling two instincts, the corporate strategist in her who analyzed everything and the single mother who wanted nothing but warmth and safety for her child. Daniel spoke with a simplicity that was disarming, telling her little snippets about his life, not grand achievements but real struggles and quiet victories. He told her about working double shifts to put his younger brother through community college, about the pride he felt fixing things most people overlooked, about how beauty could be found in ordinary acts of service. Clara, so accustomed to hearing men brag about their business deals, real estate portfolios, or exotic travels, was surprised by how refreshing his humility felt. Lily, unbothered by adult complexities, told Daniel about her favorite fairy tale book and how she wanted to build castles one day. Daniel leaned down and listened carefully, as though her words carried the same weight as Clara's multi-million-dollar boardroom decisions. Watching that, Clara felt something stir inside her, something she hadn't let herself feel in years: hope. The evening wore on, and Clara realized she hadn't touched her phone in nearly 20 minutes, a record for someone whose entire life was scheduled down to the minute. Daniel, for his part, seemed both nervous and at ease, a contradiction Clara couldn't quite place. He didn't ask her about her company, didn't flatter her wealth, didn't even seem intimidated by her status. Instead, he asked about her favorite childhood memory, what music made her feel alive, whether she ever danced when no one was watching. These were questions that reached into corners of her soul she had long since neglected. She found herself laughing, genuinely laughing, at his stories about fixing leaky faucets and dealing with eccentric tenants at the building where he worked. Lily, sipping the last of her cocoa, declared that Daniel was funny, and that was the ultimate seal of approval in her world. Clara caught herself watching him, noticing the way he listened, not the way people listen waiting for their turn to speak, but truly listening, as though her words mattered. And yet, even as warmth grew between them, Clara's mind began its usual calculation of risks. She was a millionaire CEO, a woman with influence and image to uphold. What would the world say if she, the polished face of modern success, fell for a janitor? Her shareholders wouldn't care, but the media would feast on it. Whispers would spread at galas, colleagues would raise eyebrows, and her competitors would smirk. She shifted uncomfortably, and Daniel noticed. He asked softly if she was all right. Clara nodded, but inside, the battle raged. She knew love had no caste, no rank, no title, but old habits of survival made her cautious. She had built her empire brick by brick after her divorce, determined never again to appear vulnerable. Yet here she was, sitting across from a man who earned in a year what she made in a week, and somehow, he made her feel more seen than anyone in her inner circle. The conversation drifted to dreams. Daniel admitted he once wanted to be a writer, to tell stories about ordinary people whose courage went unnoticed. He laughed it off, saying life had steered him elsewhere, but Clara saw the flicker in his eyes, the spark of someone who still carried unspoken possibilities. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like she had to be the CEO. She could just be Clara, a woman, a mother, a person searching for connection. Lily, growing sleepy, leaned against her mother's arm, but even then, she reached her tiny hand toward Daniel as though claiming him in some innocent, unspoken way. Clara noticed the tenderness in the gesture, the way Daniel didn't flinch or pull back but simply let her rest her hand there. It was such a small thing, but small things mattered. They revealed character in ways grand gestures couldn't. As the cafe began to thin out, Clara found herself dreading the inevitable end of the evening. She didn't want this fragile, unexpected connection to shatter when they walked out into the cold night air. She glanced at Daniel, and for the first time, she spoke without the filters of professionalism or guardedness. She told him about the loneliness that came with power, about the burden of carrying an empire on her shoulders, about how difficult it was to find someone who didn't see her as a walking opportunity. Daniel didn't offer platitudes or promises he couldn't keep. He simply said, "You don't have to be alone tonight." Not in a way that implied romance, but in the way that meant she didn't have to face her battles without someone willing to stand beside her. Those words, so plain and unadorned, melted her carefully constructed walls. Outside, the night was crisp, the city alive with neon lights and the hum of late-night traffic. Clara wrapped her coat tighter around her, Lily asleep in her arms, and Daniel walked beside them quietly. There was no pretense, no pressure, just presence. Clara realized that while her world was full of people chasing money, status, and influence, Daniel lived in a world where presence and kindness were currencies far more valuable. She thought of the fairy tales Lily loved so much, where true love often came not from princes but from unexpected souls who carried the courage of honesty. Clara wasn't ready to label what she felt, but she knew this was the beginning of something she hadn't anticipated. Back at her car, Clara hesitated. Part of her wanted to retreat into her familiar life of polished boardrooms and guarded interactions, but another part, a braver part, wanted to see where this could lead. She thanked Daniel for the evening, and he, with a modest shrug, said it had been the best night he'd had in years. Their eyes lingered, caught in a moment of possibility. Clara realized love doesn't announce itself with grand fanfare. Sometimes it slips in quietly, disguised as simple conversation over coffee, laughter shared with a child, and the presence of someone who sees you without expectation. For a CEO who thought she had everything, Clara began to understand she had been missing the most essential thing of all. As Daniel walked away into the night, Clara sat in her car, watching his figure fade into the glow of street lamps. She felt something shift deep within her, a seed planted, fragile but alive. The millionaire CEO who had built walls so high no one could scale them had, in a single evening, found cracks she didn't want to seal. She whispered softly to her sleeping daughter, "Maybe fairy tales do exist, just not the way we imagine." And in that moment, she knew this wasn't the end of a blind date gone well. It was the start of a story neither of them had expected, a story where true love wasn't found in status or wealth but in the courage to see beyond it.